What's going on, guys? Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you're new to this channel, we talk about mental health through pop culture. My name's Captain Nostalgia. Today we're talking about the latest Disney live-action remake with The Little Mermaid. This 2023 reimagining tells the story of Ariel, Prince Eric, and their love story, and Ursula's revenge that's kind of sprinkled in between. If you've seen the 1989 classic, then you know a lot of the story beats in this. A lot of the story beats from that film, once again, much like a lot of the other live-action remakes, are going to carry into this film as well. A couple years ago, we did a podcast talking about the live-action Lion King movie with our friends over at Geek Devotions. We kind of all came to this same conclusion that there are two classes of Disney remakes: those that choose to build upon the foundation of the original, kind of bringing more depth to the stories, and those that are essentially a shot-for-shot remake. I'm really glad to say that The Little Mermaid actually lends more towards the former than it does the latter. This movie, the writers really kind of took the foundation that the 1989 story gave us and really brought a lot of depth to this world. David Magee really does a great job at really bringing this world to life. A lot of things that I'm going to talk about in this video and my praise for this movie have a lot to do with the technical aspects. I do have some issues with the technical aspects. I'll get to all of that in a second. Let's talk about the script. And just to kind of give you a perspective of my relationship to The Little Mermaid as a property, it is not only my favorite Disney movie of all time, it is one of my top 10 favorite films of all time, easily probably one of my favorite animated movies of all time. So kind of coming into this movie, I had really high hopes for it. I had a little bit of a bias, but going back and watching this movie, the original film as an adult, and looking at it, there's a lot of questions that I have in terms of the relationship between King Triton and Ursula. What's the beef about? What's the backstory there? Eric, kind of let's explore a little bit of his kingdom a little bit more, and so on and so forth. And I'm really happy to say that I walked away with this film feeling a lot more fulfilled with the story because of Maggie's script. Not only do we kind of get to see Prince Eric in a more regal and royal role, you kind of get to understand his backstory and his relationship to not only the queen but also the kingdom of which he is going to rule over one day. King Triton gets a backstory in this one that I feel like is really well written, and you kind of have a better understanding of his headspace throughout the entire movie. Not only that, but they also give a backstory and to the relationship and kind of answer that decades-old question of what was the beef between him and Ursula and kind of why do they hate each other. And I think both of those stories are elevated by Melissa McCarthy's performance as Ursula and Javier Bardem's performance as King Triton. He really brings a lot of emotional gravity to the character and really helps him kind of feel not only broken, but also at the same time you understand a lot of where he's coming from. Even some of the side characters in this movie feel fleshed out a little bit more. I like that they kind of gave Scuttle a little bit more to do, and having a talent like Awkwafina in that role really just kind of made her one of my favorite parts of this movie. And there's a deep cut South Park reference in this movie. They wrote an entire song around it. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but I was absolutely here for it, and it's probably a very clear moment to shine for Miss Awkwafina. Talked about the technical aspects being some of my favorite portions of this film. This world absolutely looks visually stunning. I saw this in IMAX, and I don't know if it was the experience that I had seeing it in IMAX, but I feel like it's kind of one of those things that's the only really way to experience this movie. The sound design of this movie is just absolutely immersive. The world is absolutely gorgeous. Like, the underwater kingdom is just spectacularly beautiful. What they've done with Ursula's portion of the ocean is just incredibly moody and very brooding. It's very reflective of who she is, and I really liked that. when you go back and you watch the original cartoon, you kind of see the original character design for Ursula. It's very dark purple, and what they do here, they actually use lighting to bring a lot of that purple to Melissa McCarthy, and I thought that was such a brilliant choice, the way that they use lights and shadows and makeup to kind of really highlight, instead of just going for a traditional, like, this is what she looked like in the source material, this is what we're going to make her look like. I just felt like it really brought a lot of just spectacular beauty, and also got to kind of shine light one more time on the technical aspects of this film. I will say that I have a love-hate relationship with the technical aspects. While I do love the majority of them, I think this movie just does a really good job at its finer details. CGI is not always the best part of this movie. I usually have a tendency to kind of be a little bit more critical of movies that have over $150 million budget. And this one has a $250 million budget, so I think the majority of it went into the creation of this world. But unfortunately, the climax of this movie just could not buckles under the weight of the rest of the world. I would say that there are aspects of the finale in this movie that make She-Hulk look as good as the Hulk does in the first episode of that series. If you've seen the side-by-side image of She-Hulk and the Hulk from the pilot episode of She-Hulk, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If not, just Google She-Hulk, Hulk side-by-side and you'll understand. And there are some aspects of the CGI that are kind of in the beginning. You really have to look for them. And like I said, for the most part, the movie looks really crisp. I think this movie looks probably about as cinematic as any of these live-action remakes have looked. The way that Rob Marshall sets up some of these sequences, whether it's with Eric or it's with Ariel, or just kind of exploring the underwater aspects of this movie, just everything just looks absolutely gorgeous. The way that the certain sequences are lit are just absolutely beautiful. Probably one scene in particular, just to kind of highlight this, I think would be the scene where Eric gets tricked by Ursula with Ariel's voice. It's probably one of the most just absolutely breathtaking sequences in this movie. Once again, I'm going to say that this movie, the acting across the board is top notch. Nobody turns in either a half-hearted performance, a bad performance. The performances are just absolutely exceptional. Halle Bailey, it's the first time I've ever seen her in anything. I didn't know who she was before this movie. She is now on my map. I absolutely thought she was great in this movie. I will say there are portions of this movie where the emotional circumstances surrounding her Ariel character aren't really reflective of her performance. And that was kind of one of the hardest things, but those sequences are so hit or miss. You kind of have this tendency to overlook that just because the performance that she gives, especially with the part of your world that is such a highlight of this film, when she comes in it, that I not only had goosebumps, I was tearing up. Like I said, this is one of my favorite films of all time, and Bailey just absolutely crushes it. Jonah Hauer-King plays Prince Eric in this movie. Phenomenal job once again as well. I really liked his aspect because I felt like he brought a lot of the dramatic chops that not only made Prince Eric feel well-rounded out as a character, made him relatable, but also at the same time it gave a lot of emotional beats for a character that just largely felt one note in the source material and really feels really three-dimensional. And just I loved his performance in this, and I felt like his chemistry with Bailey was again just one of the best things about this film. I've already talked about how I felt about McCarthy's performance, but I really loved how the film really builds up, really kind of leaning into this Hollywood secret of less is more. I thought that it made her a lot more menacing, and it made the screen time that she did have a lot more of a highlight for her. Poor Unfortunate Souls is one of my favorite sequences in this movie. I thought she just absolutely stole every frame that she was in. She just was a truly great villain. And Melissa, please do more roles like this. There is a portions of the film that the film does feel long, but it is because they're fleshing out this world. I feel like this world probably could have felt a little bit tighter, maybe cutting about 5-10 minutes from this film. There are sequences within this film that kind of just felt like we don't really need it. It's not really adding anything to this character. And there are certain sequences in this movie that feel like that Jasmine sequence where everything freezes and it's like an MTV 2000 pop music video. Like, that's what there's a couple sequences in here between Ariel and Eric, and it just felt like had those scenes kind of been cut out, this film would have been a little bit tighter and a little bit neater. Alright, I'm going to stop singing the praise of this movie because I feel like if I keep going on any longer, I'm going to jump into spoiler territory. I'm going to go ahead and give The Little Mermaid 2023 a 4 out of 5. I think across the board, this is one of the strongest, best live action remakes that Disney has done since they've gone on this trend. The performances across the board are stellar. This world looks absolutely breathtakingly gorgeous. The music hits, the emotions hit, the amount of depth and elevation that they do to the source material is just absolutely magnificent. If you guys have seen The Little Mermaid, or if you guys are a fan of the original 1989 Little Mermaid, let me know in the comments below what you guys thought about it, either one of them. But let's talk about mental health. If you guys are new to our content, Mental Health Moment is where we take a theme of mental health out of the film we're talking about, talk about it for a few moments in the hopes to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. When you go back and watch the original 1989 film, read the Hans Christian Andersen story, or watch this movie, there's a theme of being an outsider. And in this film, this version in particular, you see it with both Ariel and Prince Eric. Ariel feels like an outsider to the underwater world. Eric feels like an outsider in his own kingdom. And what a great metaphor for how depression makes us feel. Depression is always going to hit differently for different people. It's always going to have different sources. But one of the things that I've found personally and from other conversations that I've had with people that also struggle with depression is that depression has this way of making you feel like an outsider. Kind of coaxing you into shutting yourself off because no one else is going to understand or can relate to the feelings that you're currently feeling. I'm here to remind you that that's just not true. Depression is 100% a liar. Because the more that you start talking about your depression, the more vulnerable you are, the more that you'll realize that outsiders are not quite so outsiderish. We are this secret clique organization that can relate to one another because we have this common enemy. I just want to remind you here today that you are not alone. Maybe you haven't found your Ariel, or maybe you haven't found your Prince Eric, or maybe you haven't found the group or the community that you belong to quite yet, but hold on. Stay for tomorrow, because I promise that your Ariel, your Eric, your community, they're out there and they're waiting for you. You're not alone. So no matter how hard this life gets, please stay with us. In the show notes below, you guys will find links to our mental health resource library where you guys can find and start community today and just start the conversation and talk with people that may actually understand what you're going through. I hope that's an encouragement to you guys, and I hope that you guys will check out The Little Mermaid when it comes to theaters this Friday, May 26th. In the show notes below, you guys will also find links to our podcast network, social media, Patreon, and that subscribe button. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys soon.